Good morning and welcome to the March 20th Victim Compensation Board meeting. For those of you in the room that are appearing on a specific agenda item or wish to offer public comment, the microphones at the podium and tables are directional and require that you hold them fairly close to your mouth when speaking to ensure your testimony is captured by our audio equipment. For members and participants who are appearing via Zoom, if you cannot hear the presenter, please use the comment feature to note that as staff are monitoring the comments in real time. Council, please call the roll.
Member Becton.
No matter how much we say, even last year when they had a reduction in funds and they still wanted to fund 2 new TRCs at an extremely low rate.
Member Becton.
Present.
Member Johnson.
Here.
Chair Ravel.
Present.
Thank you. Good morning. Item 1 is the approval of the minutes for the January 16, 2025 board meeting.
Is there any discussion, additions, or corrections to the minutes from board members? Do I have a motion to approve item 1?
I move approval of the January 16th, 2025 minutes.
I'll second.
Is there any public comment on this item at Sacramento or via Zoom?
Seeing none, council, please call the roll.
The motion for consideration is approval of the January 16th, 2025 meeting minutes. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
The next item is public comment. This is the opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. As any items discussed during public comment have not been agendized, the board is not permitted to take any action on these matters at this meeting. Please note, if you wish to offer public comment regarding items 6 through 11, there will be a separate call for public comment when the item is heard by the board. For those on the phone, if you previously indicated your desire to offer comments during this meeting, we will be calling on you by name or phone number. For those participating via Zoom, please raise your hand if you wish to offer comment, and we will acknowledge you and let you know when it is your turn to speak.
Thank you. I see Ms. Petros.
Good morning, board members, staff. The California Victim Compensation Board, requested $4.435 million additional funds to fill 17 positions in the 25-26 fiscal year and similar amount for ongoing years. And it says that to meet the appeals workload in the legal division, due primarily to the backlog of appeals following the Mothers Against Murder versus Cal VCB ruling. That's the agency I'm with as the executive director. And because this ruling changed hearing to in-person. However, I want to address you and say this is misleading. Considering that Cal VCB's history of excessive claim denials and delays has gone on for decades. It is not because of this court's decision. And this is evidenced by the numbers you provided on this request. The bill's denials in 2019-2020 was 7,932. It increased to 25,326 just in bills denials in 2023-2024. This is the problem. Not you're required to correct a violation that should have never happened to begin with. And so this is a serious concern to me. I feel like the agency will be rewarded with additional funds for failing to provide timely support to victims in the first place. Instead of merely increasing staffing please hold the agency and the staff accountable for its track record of delays and systemic barriers preventing victims from receiving compensation. I'm sorry to say that this program is fundamentally broken. And I was really hoping, and I believe that this court victory would change things, but it's not. You're not even acknowledging what this court decision was. Staff keep referring to it that you were doing informal hearing. Was absolutely not. So the executive officer 2 meetings ago in November referred to it as informal hearings that you were doing, as well as at the last meeting during the regulation, your attorney referred to it as it was a no hearing. You were not providing a hearing. I have a copy of your own policy that referred to it as no hearing. That was the issue with our writ of mandate. In fact, informal hearings are required by the statute. So please start being truthful and transparent so we can fix this. Otherwise, this will never be fixed. And I promise you, this additional funds is not going to fix anything if you're not going to change your minds on how to treat victims. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Petros. Is there any public comment on items not on the agenda in addition? Okay. Thanks again, Ms. Petros. We appreciate your input.
Okay, item 3 is the executive officer statement, which will be presented by Executive Officer Linda Gledhill.
Good morning, board members. Thank you very much. Just a couple of items to discuss today. First, I did want to speak briefly about the upcoming item on our agenda, funding the trauma recovery centers. We received the highest number of applications and the largest funding request ever for a program that just does not have enough funding to carry and help all of the people who have asked for it. And I just wanted to take a moment to do 2 things. One, acknowledge that this is a very difficult challenge for the board to understand the statutory framework, how the funding can be awarded, and approve funding given the limits that are available. I also want to note that the staff really did work extremely diligently to score the applications and to develop the recommendations that they have put before you. We went through multiple scenarios and really focused on providing enough funding for organizations to be successful. But this is challenging and it's not going away. It's not going to get better. As we've discussed, Prop 36 will have an impact on Prop 47 funds that support the trauma recovery centers, and we just don't know what that's going to be in the future. So we've already started internally and with the administration to have some conversations about how to manage the trauma recovery fund grant awards as we move forward. And we want to look forward to having further discussions with the board on that issue as well, because we know it's important. So I just wanted to make that commitment and happy to discuss that with any of you, what that would look like. I also wanted to update the board on the forced involuntary sterilization compensation program. As you remember that the additional requests for additional reviews were due to us by January 1st. We've now completed all of those additional reviews. We received 52 requests and we compensated 11 of those individuals at the $35,000 mark. So we are now again complete with that program. We are working to update the final report to include all the final statistics, but that work is now completed. On February 14th, CalVCB published the notice of proposed rulemaking for the victim compensation regs that you all approved at the January board meeting. Written comments can be received through April 1st. There has been a request for a public hearing where comments on the regulations can be provided. By statute, that hearing will be scheduled for a day after the close of the written comment period. Finally, April is a busy month for us. It is both Sexual Assault Awareness Month and National Crime Victims' Rights Week, which this year is April 6th through the 12th. As always, CalVCB does many activities and events during this time. We'll be preparing social media toolkit that we share with our partners. We also, at the office here, have an annual denim drive. This year, we're partnering with Empower YOLO, which supports sexual assault, domestic violence, and human trafficking victims with a 24-hour crisis intervention, emergency shelter, and other resources. They have a clothing closet that our staff visited and know that they will greatly appreciate all of the denim that we collect. Denim Day is officially April 30th this year. So that's all I have for you today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Officer Gledhill. Are there any questions or comments from board members? Thank you for discussing the possibility of a further discussion on the TRCs. I think this is always a difficult issue for us. Obviously, the work is really important and the communities really need it, and there's never enough funding for everyone. And so I think us having a better understanding of how the program works would be very useful.
Sure.
Yes, of course.
I wasn't sure whether now or the TRC item is the right item, but I do think, I want to echo that sentiment that, just get my microphone in line here. Echo that sentiment that obviously it's going to be a bit of a long road ahead or a tough road ahead for the TRC program. Prop 36, obviously, as you mentioned, is going to depreciate or diminish the funding that we receive. The programs will continue to suffer and they will need additional support. And so I guess I just, I want to explore that a little further briefly here. I know, I'm sure I'm glad that the conversations are already started with the administration, with the legislature, and figure out what that can look like moving ahead. But I do also think that, sort of being able to come back to the board with a strategy for addressing that, addressing the drop in funding. It'd be great, I think, in that process to hear from some of the voices in the TRC community to just better understand what they need. And I'm sure you're having those conversations, absolutely. But it'd just be good to have that to the board as well, so that we just have a clear insight on both. So what conversations are happening, making sure that everyone's involved, and that we have a sort of a strategy moving ahead for how to plan for the reduction in funds and how we can best support the trauma and recovery centers with that in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to continue to have this conversation and talk to the chair about how best to sort of loop in the board and have that information presented to you.
Great, I really appreciate that. And, I think I just have in mind that we're going to be faced with an even more difficult conversation precisely a year from now. I want to make sure that we're best informed to make those decisions. And we have a picture of what the plan is moving ahead. It's tough to watch, and for all of us, I'm sure. And so we just want to make sure we're best positioned to support these trauma recovery centers and make the best decisions we can with the limited funding we have.
Absolutely. No, I think we're all in agreement on that.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Is there any further questions or comments for Executive Officer Gledhill?
Seeing none, we will move to item 4, which is the legislative update, and it will be presented by Katie Gardinas.
Good morning. The legislature's deadline for bill introductions was February 21st, and I would like to mention a few key bills that we are following. The first bill is not included in the written report as it was amended from a spot bill this week. AB 1100 by Assemblymember Sharp Collins would make significant changes to victim compensation statutes. This bill would eliminate involvement in the events leading to the qualifying crime and lack of coordination with law enforcement as reasons for denial of an application. It would expand the forms of evidence that can verify a qualifying crime in lieu of a police report and prevent CalVCB from seeking other information about eligibility from third parties if one of those forms of evidence is submitted. It would also expand compensation for income loss to include individuals who were not employed at the time of the crime and guarantee a minimum level of compensation based on full-time employment at minimum wage. SB 490 by Senator Umberg would make changes to the processes for considering claims for the compensation of erroneously convicted individuals. This bill would provide the Attorney General and district attorneys with additional time to file an objection to compensation of a claimant and allow them to rely on evidence solely on the trial record. It would also prohibit compensation to those currently serving a sentence for another serious or violent felony and require awards of compensation to first go to pay any outstanding restitution orders owed by the claimant. AB 379 by Assemblymember Krell would require CalVCB to award grants to community-based organizations that are led by survivors of sex trafficking or that are guided by substantial survivor input and that provide direct services to vulnerable individuals in areas with a high concentration of sex trafficking. Grants would be funded from the Survivor Support Fund as established by this bill. The bill would also create an additional fine of $1,000 for certain crimes of solicitation of prostitution and loitering with intent, and it would require those fines to be deposited in the Survivor Support Fund. AB 1213 by Assemblymember Stefani would provide that a victim restitution order shall have priority over any other debts, liens, or monetary judgments. And then lastly, SB 470 by Senator Laird would delete the January 1, 2026 sunset date on current provisions governing the use of teleconferencing for public meetings by a state body, extending indefinitely the current teleconferencing requirements. Those are the highlights, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Deputy Cardenas. I do have a question about this AB 1100. I realize that was just changed from a spot bill this week, and so you may not have had much time to analyze it, but there are some pretty substantial proposed changes, some of which are in line with what the proposed changes to the federal regs that ended up not going through were. And so if that were to become law, would that mean that in some of these cases, federal funding might not be available?
I think that that is possible. We did just learn about the bill on, I think, Monday afternoon, and so we are still analyzing it, but yes, I think that could be possible.
Thank you. And I didn't know that there was a bill to extend the Bagley-Keene teleconference exemption, so that's really good news, transporting us into the modern era. Any other questions or comments for Ms. Cardenas?
Just one question, Chair, if that's okay. On AB 379, is there an appropriation attached to that bill, or would that be done through budget separate?
The bill establishes that the funding will come from the additional fine, the $1,000 loitering fee. And so at this point in time, there's no additional appropriation outside of creating that new fee.
Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Cardenas.
Is there any public comment on this item here in Sacramento or via Zoom? Okay. Seeing none. Item 5 is the contract report, which will be presented by Deputy Executive Officer Sean Martinez.
Good morning, Sean
Ramirez, excuse me.
Good morning, board members. For today's contract report, we have 2 items that we request your action on. As our current language contract is expiring, CalVCB seeks approval to move forward on a new language services contract. The contract will provide service translation and interpret services, ensuring equal access for applicants, including those with limited English proficiency. The request includes additional funding to accommodate for the increased translation needs relative to in-person appeal hearings. We are requesting to solicit for a 36-month term contract not to exceed $300,000. The second item we seek approval to procure is a single information technology contract that replaces 3 separate service contracts for software that offers document scanning capabilities for the compensation and restitution system, as well as offers on-call support for troubleshooting, updates, and maintenance to ensure uninterrupted operations. We are requesting approval to initiate a 36-month term contract not to exceed $375,000. All remaining items in the contract report are informational. These items are for information technology services and mail services. We request approval on items 1 and 2 from your board.
Thank you, Deputy Ramirez. Are there any questions or comments from the board for Deputy Ramirez? Do I have a motion to approve the contract to provide translation and interpretation services and the contract to procure document scanning functionality for the compensation and restitution system?
I move to approve the two contracts.
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item here in Sacramento or via Zoom?
Seeing none, council, please call the roll.
The pending motion is approval of the executive officer's execution of the contract to provide translation and interpretation services in the amount of $300,000 and the execution of the contract to provide scanning functionality for the CARES database in the amount of $375,000. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, Deputy Ramirez.
Thank you. Item 6 is the proposal to approve fiscal year 2025-26 Trauma Recovery Center Grant Awards, which will be presented by Deputy Executive Officer Katie Gardinas.
Hello again. We have a presentation that we have for this item as well. See, it's up. I am here today to request approval of staff's recommendation to fund Trauma Recovery Center grants. CalVCB is charged with administering the Trauma Recovery Center grant process. TRC grants are awarded on a 2-year cycle, and there is no limit to the amount of funding that can be requested, and there is no guarantee of funding regardless of whether the TRC was previously funded or not. Next slide, please. In this cycle, qualified applicants requested over $60 million in grant funds, and even with the addition of savings from prior year funds, there is only $18 million available to distribute. For this grant cycle, CalVCB introduced the Notice of Funds Available, or NOFA, in December and received applications from interested organizations. Staff also hosted a webinar in December to walk organizations through the NOFA process. In January, staff responded to questions from applicants and posted the answers on our website to ensure fairness in the process. The application scoring process is consistent with previous board-approved practice. Staff take the minimum qualifications as outlined in statute, and grantees who meet the minimum qualifications are scored. Consideration is given to things like geography and how quickly the organization would be able to get up and running as a TRC. These scores are used to develop the recommendations for the board. Although there are clusters of trauma recovery centers across the state, CalVCB has no control over who applies for the grants or where they are located. In developing this recommendation for the board, staff did consider options to maintain or provide services in as many geographic locations as possible, given the amount of funding available, the amount of funding requested, the number of applicants who applied, and the scores that those applicants received. Next slide, please. As we previously shared, there is difficulty maintaining the grant administration for this important work due to the disproportionate increase in applications against insufficient funding to accommodate the request. 40 organizations applied for TRC funding this year, which is the highest number ever. The only guaranteed funding for the TRC program is $2 million that comes from the restitution fund. Additional funding comes from the Safe Neighborhood Schools Fund, and in this cycle, as in the past few years, we also have one-time funding from the State's General Fund appropriated in the Budget Act of 2022. The funding recommendation this year also includes prior year savings. An unintended consequence of the $13.3 million general fund allocation to increase TRC grant awards was that some TRCs were not able to spend all of the money that they received. Since the general fund dollars began to expire this year, we performed a full accounting of TRC funding to identify any extra dollars that we could use to fund TRCs and help victims. We recommend that the board use this funding, about $5.5 million, to maximize the number and amount of awards for this cycle. By doing so, we reach approximately $18 million to grant in this cycle. The numbers for the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Fund and the General Fund included in your binder reflect budget estimates. CalVCB will receive our final funding numbers with the May revise. This slide, again, shows that we received $60 million in requests from qualified applicants, but estimate that we only have $18 million to distribute. This is the largest gap between available funding and funding requests in the history of the TRC grants. Next slide, please. Of the 40 applicants, there are 31 organizations that met minimum qualifications, with scores ranging from 35 to 84 points out of 100. 9 applicants were disqualified because they did not meet the minimum qualifications outlined in state law. Next slide, please. Thus, we are again at this crossroads where there is not enough funding to allocate to all applicants, and so we again explored ways to equitably fund as many applicants as possible. Given that the scores were so far apart, a tiered approach that grouped similar scores together was applied. Our funding recommendation uses a similar methodology as approved by the board in March 2023. Specifically, the recommendation the board adopted included capping the maximum funding at $2.2 million for the 2-year cycle, and then placing each TRC in a tier commensurate with the score that they received. A funding percentage is also applied to each tier. The $2.2 million is based on CalVCB's estimate that TRCs generally need around $1.1 million each year to be successful. As this slide shows, the funding methodology is necessary because we could not even fund all of the organizations in tiers 1 through 3 if we granted the amount that they requested. The final bar chart shows that CalVCB can grant funding to tiers 1 through 3 only after applying the $2.2 million cap and funding each tier at a given percentage. Although the monetary cap and tiered funding methodology are not in statute, they provide a fair methodology for granting money to the most qualified applicants given the finite amount of funds available. Next slide, please. We also think it's important to share that even after maximizing all available funds, there is not enough funding for all of the existing TRCs as shown in this slide. We also do not have the statutory authority to only fund existing TRCs. Next slide, please. Therefore, after thoughtful consideration, staff recommends funding 11 TRCs who each landed in tiers 1, 2, and 3. This recommendation includes funding 9 existing TRCs and 2 new TRCs. This recommendation prioritizes giving organizations enough money to successfully operate on what they requested and the $1.1 million benchmark for success. We need TRC organizations to have enough funding to be functional. Overall, we believe that this recommendation is both fair and financially feasible. Next slide, please. As this slide shows, this recommendation also meets our objective to provide TRC services across the state. If the board adopts this recommendation, CalVCB will fund TRCs in the Bay Area, Northern, Central, and Southern California regions. We recognize that we continue to have limited representation in Central California with only 1 organization in Gilroy. However, the existing TRCs that are not recommended for funding are in the Bay Area and Southern California. This recommendation was not reached without much consideration. Our teams ran a multitude of alternative scenarios, each of which resulted in reducing the awards so significantly that TRCs would likely not be fiscally operational. For example, we considered funding Tier 4, which includes 10 additional applicants who scored between 61 and 66 points. These applicants requested $15 million collectively. However, to make this scenario work, the Tier 1 applicants would only receive 75% of their requested award up to $2.2 million, and Tier 4 applicants would only receive 50%. This spreads the funding too thin for the TRCs to be successful, and some TRCs would likely not be able to meet the statutory requirements at this level of funding. All of this is to say that we didn't arrive at this final recommendation lightly, and we understand that the communities with existing TRCs that are not recommended for continued funding will be impacted. However, we believe that this recommendation is the best to balance the viability and success of TRCs who received higher scores and are recommended for funding. We seek that the board approve the Trauma Recovery Center grant awards as recommended and further authorize staff to increase or decrease the awards as necessary to reflect the funds available following the release of the governor's revised budget in May.
Thank you, Deputy Cardenas. Is there any discussion regarding the proposal to approve fiscal year 2025-26 Trauma Recovery Center grant awards from the board?
Is it possible to hear stakeholders first?
Is that out of order, or are we permitted to hear from our stakeholders?
It's actually out of order, Chair. According to Robert's Rules of Order, you need a motion on the table. Of course, that motion could be withdrawn or amended following information from the stakeholders, but you do need a motion for that.
Okay. So we can have additional discussion after hearing from the public. Okay. In that case, is there any discussion at this point? I'll note that one region that is not represented in this proposal is the Central Valley as well. Are there other existing TRCs that are on the prior year's funding track that are in that region?
There are not. Currently, we do still have the Central California pilot program that is operational. And I believe that that program will expire as these general fund dollars start to expire in September. But outside of that, there are no other additional existing TRCs in that region.
Thank you. Yeah, staff are in a very difficult position. It's extremely difficult for the TRCs, of course, but with the very limited funding available to meet the need here, it's really hard to distribute that fairly, both geographically and recognizing existing TRCs and the needs in the various communities.
If I may. Yeah, I would just echo that this is obviously a very difficult job for staff, and it's a very difficult process for the TRCs as well, right? I will note that, at least as I understand it, these are proposed awards, but they could be they could be less depending on funding and how it comes through. And so that puts TRCs, even those awarded, in an additional space of uncertainty, which is just not a great place to operate. Obviously, I'm very interested to hear what the stakeholders have to say in this process. So the most important voice here, but a few things really strike me that continuity is important here for TRCs, and the 2-year process. So we make awards every year, and they're funding for 2 years. Provides a sort of a bit of a dislocation in the process, right? You apply 1 year, you get funded 2 years, and then we give a separate set of awards the following year. I'm thinking whether there's a way to regulate that in some way, so that maybe it's 2 years and we just do it every 2 years. I don't know what that looks like. Are there ways to avoid that uncertainty of reducing, the potential of reducing the award size following the award? Any way that we can, on a go forward basis, find ways to reduce that uncertainty for TRCs, I think is a really important piece of the process. I think about obviously statutorily, as you said, we're not allowed to give to only award existing facilities, but you could alter the grant, the scoring criteria such that it gives greater preference to them, et cetera. I'm not the expert here, so and I know you all are going to go through a process here as the funds continue to diminish to figure out whether this grant or this scoring process and whether the grant process can be amended to better suit the TRCs. And I don't mean to cast shade on the process. I think it's a very good process. It's just a very difficult, it's difficult for staff, it's difficult for TRCs, and I feel for everybody in this process. That being said, it's a really great opportunity that we have to fund these TRCs that have come forward and the good work that they do. So I want to look at the positive side of it too. I'm sure I'll have more to say as we go through here, but I just wanted to highlight the need, I think, to step back a little bit and evaluate how this process happens, and how we score grants and or score applicants, and rank these applications on a go-forward basis.
And Chair, if I could, I
Yes,
would, of course, echo the comments that have already been made. It is a very, very difficult process, and I know that there's no perfect formula that we can come up with. But I think every time we visit this decision-making process. It's a very, very difficult time. I know staff has done a wonderful job of trying to come up with a criteria that is going to be fair to everyone into the process, but it's also important. I do want to hear from our stakeholders here today just to understand the impacts and get their input about anything that you think we could or should be thinking about that has not been put on the table to make the process work better for everyone. I know that we don't have any control over the amount of money.
We've lost you, Member Becton.
Perhaps to
Oh,
rethink
you're back.
even our criteria just to see if we have other options to us that could result in different outcomes. So I'm looking forward to hear from the stakeholders too.
Thank you, Member Becton. Okay, with that, do I have a motion to approve item 6?
I will make the motion just so that we can put the discussion on the table, understanding that we can amend the motion after we hear all of the comments if we think that's appropriate. So I will move to approve item 6 as it is stated in the agenda.
And I'll second with the same understanding that the motion can be withdrawn and the recommendation revised if needed. So I think we're ready to take public comment now. Our first commenter, we have Teddy Valenzuela.
Good morning, board. Thank you. What I wanted to say is that we're here from Amana Said, and we're in downtown Los Angeles, and we've had our TRC grant since 2021. We service the downtown Los Angeles area with high crime rate and a lot of trauma. Our trauma recovery center has been well known and it's well respected with an abundance of referrals. And there's times that we can't carry all the referrals, but we try to refer them to some of the other LA areas. But it's a little hard when it's far away from where our clients live. Now, the first time that we got the grant in 2021, we did get the full 2.5. It did take a while for us to ramp up, but our second year, the second round, which was in 2023, we were up ready to go. And we already had everything in place and we were already known. And we still didn't get the request that we wanted, but we got 1.2 million. So that's what we have been functioning on. And we've still been able to provide good service of servicing at least over 100 clients, where we currently have 64 active. I know that, that the TRC Trauma Center has a transition plan in place, client care. We will do our best. But what I'm advocating for is that because we were eliminated to not receive any funding at all. And this was definitely disheartening, not only to our staff, but our community that we serve that rely on trauma recovery services. If we can get even the 2 million that we asked for and get half of that, we could still function on providing a service. And we can still try to fill in that gap with other grants. So I'm requesting that the board and reconsider and advocating that Almeida Community Counseling continues to be providing this well-needed service because of the good work that we have done and how we are known in the SPALS 4 area and the Pico Union, which, like I said, has a high crime rate. And it also has a tremendous amount of trauma that we continue servicing this client. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I also have one question for the board. We were also at the meeting in 2023 when we went through this about awarding grants. And we were not ones that were cut with our funding, but we had a lot of other trauma recovery centers that had been in existence for 4 to 6 years that were cut. They made their voice really well known, and the board was able to take that in consideration And I'm sure that that's some of what the reason why we got our funding cut from the 2.5 that we asked for to 1.2, because some of those that spoke up did not lose their funding. So my question is, will that be considered again this time around that we did for the 2023-25 funding? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Valenzuela. We'll wait to hear from all our public commenters, and then we can have additional discussion. Okay, next I see Ms. Wade.
Good morning. My name is Martha Wade. I am the founder and executive director of A Quarter Blues Trauma Recovery Center in Orange County. Our funding was also cut 100%. 4 years ago, when we were identified as a TRC during the 2021-23 grant cycle, I listened to TRCs who had their grants not renewed, and they expressed their frustration, and they were devastated. And at that time, I thought, well, there's no guarantee in grants. You always have to apply, and as a nonprofit, you always have to be ready to sustain itself, even when a major funder hasn't continued their financial investment. After working as an official TRC for 4 years, I understand their shock and concern that I'm in the midst of right now. I thought once A Quarter Blue was funded by the state that more diverse funding would follow. But the truth is, the average donor in California and America does not want to align themselves with something so dark. We would have been pleased to have received a portion of what we requested. While we put 100% funding, we realistically knew that that was not going to occur, but we needed to put it out there. So any percentage of what we requested helps fill in that gap. When a center is ministering to the complex needs of crime survivors, steps up their work in line with the TRC model, the community becomes reliant on their services, even though personal investments do not. The courts and Children's Hospital of Orange County and many more agencies have come to expect A Quarter Blue to take over where they are unable to meet the crime survivors' needs. A Quarter Blue is the only trauma recovery center in Orange County, and I hurt for A Quarter Blue's clients and victims of crime in Orange County due to the decision that was made. The decision was not to fund a different TRC in Orange County, but to cut the funding completely in Orange County and adjacent areas in need of their support. I hold no ill will for new TRCs. We were one 4 years ago. I wish you all the best in your transformational work. At the same time, I wish the needs of crime survivors of existing TRCs would be considered and ministered to when these decisions are being made. I do not know where we fell short in our application. No one communicated to us. We were actually notified because someone saw that A Quarter Blue was not on the agenda. A Quarter Blue was never notified of any failures of service over the 4 years, and no one ever visited our site to see the uniqueness of A Quarter Blue and the need for continued funding. I understand that this is not a normal practice of this application process and the decision making, but I truly believe it is important for that to be seen as we provide all this data showing our work and the impact that we're having. So I encourage you to consider that there are broken people in Orange County who need a trauma recovery center. While I would hope for the board to reconvene and reconsider supporting A Quarter Blue's valuable work, I at least want the board to hear that in the future, please do not leave victims of crime without a center once it has been established. They deserve to have a place where they can be heard and be restored. I greatly appreciate your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Wade, for your time and for your testimony. Ms. Wiggle.
Hey, thank you, and good morning to the CalVCB board and staff and to the public. I'm Stacy Wigall. I'm the Director of Training and Technical Assistance for the National Alliance of Trauma Recovery Centers. We represent 59 TRCs in 15 states, with 24 of those being in California. And I want to say that we appreciate the board's investment in the TRC program and also the adoption of the UCSF TRC model for serving survivors of violence that we developed, as well as your commitment to continued funding for the program in the wake of the passing of Prop 36, and to adequately funding each TRC to be able to have fidelity to this comprehensive model and do the work that they do. And as you're engaging in that process of looking for additional funding, we would be glad to contribute to that along with the California TRCs. I also do want to acknowledge, though, the 6 established TRCs that have not been recommended for funding in this cycle. And as others have noted, the devastating impacts that losing a TRC has on the communities and people they serve. Opening a TRC is an investment in a community that enables more survivors of violence to get access to these comprehensive and safety net services for stabilization and healing. And as we know from our work in training and technical assistance, it's an investment of time, of funds, of the effort that goes into learning the model, hiring and recruiting team members, building relationships with community partners, with referral partners, and most importantly, with survivors. And these 6 TRCs have all done that work. So the decision to not grant them the funds needed to continue services does leave service gaps and barriers for survivors of violence in their communities. And whether a TRC was established a decade ago or just in the last grant funding cycle, we see that the opening and closing of trauma recovery centers and grant cycle after cycle is an inefficient use of these funds. And while we all see the need to expand the network of TRCs in California and grow the program and serve more survivors, we also see that survivors lose out when we don't also support and sustain existing programs that are doing strong and effective work as we see them. I want to also share that the NATRC would be happy to, in collaboration with the staff and the board, to share examples of statutory support for this approach from other states, as well as to share examples of grant scoring options from other states, and to be a contributor to your process of ongoing support for the TRC program in California. We respectfully also do request that the board reconsider the current recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wiggall. Ms. Tara.
Hi, good morning. My name is Brina Tyra. I'm the administrative director of the All of You TRC, and I'm also an emergency physician here at All of You. So, from my perspective, thankfully we were in the group of TRCs that was scored highly and recommended to be funded. But I want to share the perspective that, each year, this is really a heart-wrenching process for every TRC. And what I've seen, since we've been funded, we're going into our 3rd grant cycle, is that, every year we find ourselves here listening to the same type of conversation at these meetings about funding and about how difficult it is and how difficult the decision is. And I just want to suggest that, moving forward, the TRCs together with the board could come together and perhaps reconceptualize the way in which this funding is administered. I want to make the analogy to medical care, right? I also work in an emergency department. Everyone understands that emergency medical care is something that is necessary continuously to maintain the health of the public. And so it's really striking to me that we conceptualize this as being something different, that care for victims is on a grant cycle and the funding is precarious. And we think of it as not something that is continuous care, but something that is a grant and something that is additional. So, could we consider conceptualizing in the future other methods of administering this funding whereby we could offer in the state of California continuous care in, following the model of the TRC? And, I think that, we've seen very much over the course of several years now what the limits of, administering the funds in this way are. And, maybe it's time to brainstorm what a new model, would look like and do that collaboratively as a community, both the TRCs and the members of the board together. So thank you for listening. That is my suggestion for how to move forward and hopefully have less disrupted care and more continuous care available to the people who need it, because I think that is our shared goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tyra. Absolutely, that is our shared goal. Ms. Petros.
Thank you. Margaret Petros, advocate with Mothers Against Murder. TRC is very important work for crime victims. And I wish as a victim advocate and a public member, I see more data on these already that existed. And Ms. Wade confirmed my suspicion is this money is given and no follow-up is done because obviously no one even contacted her. So please, again, remember this program its work need to change in order for us all to benefit, for victims to benefit from these programs. I also want to note that I see Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office given a grant this year of more than $2 million. And I'm wondering, what business does the district attorney office be involved in treating trauma victims? Isn't there a conflict of interest? It may take one smart defense attorney to come back and say, what? You're treating the victim that's testified in this case, and it's gonna really create problems. And I want you to think of that. And you have an actual prosecutor on the board member, Diane Beckton. I wonder what she thinks of prosecutor's office treating victims when their job is to prosecute independently. And all who work for the prosecutor's office are part of the prosecution team. What information has to be shared with the defense? I'm not a lawyer, but these things are common sense for me. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Petros. Ms. Guerrero.
Hi, good morning. My name is Dana Guerrero. I'm the Senior Director for Amana Said. And I really want to echo what some of the other agencies have spoken about supporting and sustaining existing TRCs that are known in the community and that have established relationships within the community. As Amana said, the TRC fills in a much needed gap for our clients, and I'm devastated that come June, we're no longer going to be able to provide that service to our clients. When we look at this process as a whole, as many have spoken, it's not aligned with the practice of TRC. You know, it is a very much trauma-informed practice, and to say that no matter where a client is within their treatment, come June, we are no longer able to service that client. We were also the agency that was tasked and awarded the Central California pilot program. And we were informed that we were not able to reapply for that grant as well. And so we had already done the work of establishing the relationships, and there is a need in Central California. And so for us to, you know, just end all services come June, it just doesn't seem to be the best practice. And I do really would like to advocate for a better just process in general, and to respectfully ask that this decision be reconsidered. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Guerrero. Mr. Chong.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Vince Chong. I serve as one of the co-directors of the Safe Harbor TRC at Harbor UCLA, where I work as a trauma surgeon. We were one of the TRCs that were recommended to be defunded 4 years ago over what we understood to be a technicality of our application. And I will always remember and remain grateful for the support of the community and the board to be able to revise our application in order to keep our doors open. In the years since, we've collaborated successfully with our area TRCs. The network that has been created serves a fundamental resource for the community members we serve, especially since the burden of violence and crime already overwhelms our ability to treat all of our patients and clients. So I just wanted to say I agree with what everyone has said about creating a new model For the grant application, I would also like to officially state that we support the idea of allowing existing TRCs to be awarded for their incredible work that they've already been able to establish with the funding from the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Chung. Ms. McLaughlin.
Yes, good morning. I'm speaking in relation to this decision in regards to a quarter blue. As a previous client and a recipient of the services offered by a quarter blue, I can only say that this decision is a travesty, and I would implore the powers that be to reconsider their decision. Our family lived through a scenario which can only be described as truly horrific. A knock on the door one night, and we were greeted by the faces of 6 law enforcement and FBI officers. They needed to break the news to us that our only child, our son, then 9, had been identified as one of the victims of a serial pedophile. There was ironclad evidence by way of video footage of his perverse sexual activity with our son. This man was known to us only as the mild-mannered and incredibly helpful childcare person that we relied on. And yet our son was one of 17 later identified victims. And we found ourselves in the middle of one of California's largest investigations and subsequent cases involving the sexual abuse of minors by a pedophile. And the preceding 5 years were hell. Now, we relied on the almost family-like support that was offered by the team at A Quarter Blue to help us deal with the ongoing needs of our son and our family. And I cannot overstate the importance of getting families such as ours into the doors of such facilities and centres such as A Quarter Blue. It's imperative, and it's an imperative part of healing that from some of the darkest crimes that life can throw at a person, that there is availability of some practical expertise. And for the most part, that needs to be face-to-face and hands-on therapy, and it happens outside of the home. Without A Quarter Blue by my side, I, as a parent, I would have given in to the overwhelming darkness and the depression that was triggered by this ordeal. My innermost thoughts and demons would have overtaken my rational side, and I would have been in no position to help my child through his trauma and to try and make sense of his life. So to hear that a service as incredibly vital as A Quarter Blue will not be funded going forward, that fills me with dread. And especially for those families and children who are yet to find them. And they're going to need them so, so badly. So it's with a heavy heart that I would ask and I would implore that this funding decision is revisited and revised. I would ask that A Quarter Blue is once again a recipient of this much needed funding, and to ensure that this vital organisation is available to Orange County families for years to come. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin, for your time and for your comments. And let me just say, I sincerely am sorry for the horror that you and your family suffered. Mr. Buchanan.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ed Buchanan, represent BOSS, Building Opportunities for Self-Sufficiency, and oversee the Oakland Trauma Recovery Center. And we're the very first trauma recovery center in the history of Oakland. And we're in Deep East Oakland and 75th International, 7501 International. And we are unfortunately weren't considered for the grant to renew our program. But my question is, you know, I'm not sure what was the reasoning or rationale behind that, because if you think about just the communities that need it, that this community is really needs, have a trauma recovery center, especially like in light of, what's been going on in the city. I mean, homicide rates have gone up by 43% since last year. Non-aggravated assaults have declined, but robberies have increased and whatnot. And so, just and I'm also part of the Coalition for Advancing Public Safety meetings. I attend those meetings, and there, the effort is to try to reduce like crime, nationwide. So you have people from National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, and the data shows that helping people with violence intervention and gun preventions, et cetera, doing that type of work, working with Department of Violence Prevention, et cetera, intervention, providing mental health support, helping people heal from their trauma is a way to help reduce crime and is a way to lower recidivism. And so it makes no sense to strip people of these resources. And we deliberately are placed in the heart of a community that is in dire need of support so that we provide a safe healing, a haven for healing for folks. And so we've seen already, we've built a lot of partnerships with probation, with the public defender's office, et cetera. And our services are helping people to stabilize, to heal from their trauma, to get resource, to get benefits, et cetera. And so to strip the community of that is a travesty. It's really horrendous, and it makes no sense. And so my question to the board and to everybody is that, okay, so you're not going to fund a trauma recovery center where we're seeing that people are healing and are getting, help from it. What's plan B? But I hope that the board, I thank you for your time. And I hope that the board and others reconsiders this decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. And Ms. Rivas.
Good morning. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk about what we're feeling inside. I am Elizabeth Rivas, the clinical director for A Quarter Blue in Orange County. And my heart is hurting, to be honest with you. I'm hearing so much information that you need to know about. And a lot of people are talking from the TRC view. I want to talk from the victim view because I am a licensed marriage and family therapist and I work with these victims every single day. And I need you to know that these victims need a place. The majority of our clients are children who have been sexually abused. How can we turn them away? How can we not have a place for them to go and to feel safe? And it just hurts my heart that, again, to completely disregard Orange County, which is the place of Disneyland and, Angels baseball and Surf City, Huntington Beach. It's not all what it's, played out to be. There's a crime, lots of crime in Orange County. And I'm just asking that you reconsider because there is a need. And I don't know if you can tell, but I'm very passionate about what I do. And this is what I believe in. And this is the years and years of education that I have spent to give my life back and to contribute in a beautiful way. Just like everybody has said that the healing process, that is our reward, to see people heal. And if we don't have these agencies and these facilities to go to, where are they going to go? What am I going to tell that 10-year-old little girl, that 7-year-old little boy? So I just want to share my feelings. Thank you so much for your time. And I hope you do take what everybody is saying into consideration. And one more thing, I'm in shock about the denials of the CalVCB invoices. I work with a lot of different colleagues that all tell me the same thing. Their invoices are getting denied left and right, and that needs to be fixed. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful and blessed day.
Thank you, Ms. Rivas. Mr. Fraser.
Yes, good morning. How are you? My name is Donald Fraser. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Building Opportunities for Self-Sufficiency, also known as BOSS. And our TRC was not funded. And so I'm speaking on behalf of the victims we serve and on behalf of the staff and the community as well. When we were awarded this last several years ago, Oakland had never had a trauma recovery center, and Oakland is the third highest in violent crime in the state of California. We thought it was a shame that Oakland had never had a trauma recovery center, where the majority of crime victims with shootings and homicide are Black people. Furthermore, we know that 50% of crimes, or more than 50% of crimes, are not reported. There's a large number of domestic violence victims that come to our site that need help, that don't report these crimes. There's a large amount of immigrants that are coming to our site that need help, that can't go anywhere else, and they're not going to report a crime. In the community in Oakland, we're in East Oakland, right in the heart of East Oakland, where the majority of these activities are happening. Right across the street from our partner, Baywell Health, who is a federally qualified health center. We're in a prime position to do great work in this community where these crimes are not being reported, where people still need help to relieve themselves of trauma. So look, all the reasons in the world and excuses in the world that you guys come up with to not fund certain TRCs, I get it, but you have to understand the other side. And the reasons why we applied for this TRC is because there was nothing else there. There was nothing else there for the people, right? For over-policed environments, in environments that are just run down, deserts, and there's no services there. And you have to understand the importance of us being there to give people hope, to give people something that they can hold on to. Thank you for hearing me out, and I hope you reconsider. I really do, because it's going to be a drastic. Like, where do they go? Where do we send the people when we shut it down? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fraser. Ms. Nussbaum.
Yes, good morning, members of the board. My name is Rebecca Nussbaum, and I am speaking on behalf of Community Resource Center's Trauma Recovery Center, which has provided essential services to survivors of violence in our community. We were a new TRC in 2023, and unfortunately, we, as many members in this group have already shared, we were not recommended for funding in this cycle. And I just want to share that after significant investment in time and staff training, opening new offices, organizationally, the decision to defund our TRC is really devastating, and not only for our staff, but more importantly for the survivors who are relying on our trauma-informed care. And again, we're working with the process to make sure that there's continuity of care for the folks that we're currently working with. But again, I want to also add and piggyback on some of the comments about the process of stopping and starting TRC programs really not being an efficient use of resources. It does take significant time, effort, and funding to establish the new TRC. We went through the whole training process with our national partners and really also to build trust with survivors and with community partners who are referring to our organization, and to develop the infrastructure needed to provide that care. And so defunding existing TRCs while also introducing new ones, I think just create some unnecessary gaps in services. And again, we were a new TRC, so I acknowledge the work and effort needed and want to support those programs as well. But I just want to emphasize the stopping and starting is not really it is so destabilizing for a nonprofit organization. We do work with other state funders, and I know Cal OES has 5-year funding cycles. So I just want to urge the board to revisit and revise its funding decisions as well as their process to ensure the continuity of care for survivors and stability for organizations who are trying to provide that high level of care. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nussbaum. Mr. Covarrubias.
Hello, everyone. My name's Arturo. Just wanted to underscore, along with everybody, about the inefficient use of starting and stopping trauma recovery centers. It takes just time, investment, learning over months, right, to sort of hire staff, to find the right staff, right? There's a HR process and things. And so I just wanted to speak to that. I was working at the Long Beach Trauma Recovery Center in Southern California, and we received last cycle a reduction, and it was, I think, about a 40% reduction in funding. And just that, all of our effort to reduce staff, to reduce the services takes a lot of time and effort, and it moves the focus away from clients and providing services and trying to just manage, an organization and reduce its size and capability. So I just wanted to really underscore, that starting and stopping, and I think this is the most, in this round, 6 that have not been recommended for funding is the most that has ever happened. And it's just a huge waste of funds, especially in a time where funds are scarce, right? We're in a difficult, time, and it makes sense to attempt to use those funds as best as we can, since there's not as much as we used to have. And I know that, statute, there's not any sort of, per statute, we can't necessarily do that, but, there are other things that were not statute that have been approved by the board. And, in terms of the tiered funding sort of evaluation, that's not part of statute, but that has been sort of approved. So just wanted to underscore that, and please, reconsider your decision. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Covarrubias. Is there any additional public comment?
Chair, if I may.
Yes.
I just wanted to kind of echo that, Cal VCB is really disheartened with this funding situation as well. And we'd obviously would like to fund all existing organizations, and the funding situation, as the executive officer mentioned in her statements, is unfortunately not looking like it's going to be great in the future years as well, right? And so I just wanted to say that we understand the frustrations of these organizations, and if there was funding available, we would fund them. And we're doing our best to score these grants and make recommendations to you all that align with the statute. And we just understand how difficult that this is for those organizations.
Thank you, Deputy Cardenas. I know the board feels that way as well. This is not a situation that any of us want to be in. We know how important this work is. Having had the benefit of hearing the wisdom of our colleagues in the community, is there additional discussion from the board?
Chair, if I may, I do have a question, just so I can understand the scoring criteria a little better. So I don't know how to phrase this so that you can accurately answer it, but if an existing facility applies and a new facility applies, and the new facility outcompetes the existing facility for whatever reason, is there a way to give a picture of what might land it in that place? What weight is being an existing facility and having existing infrastructure given in that process. Is there a way to give a picture of that, the sort of the scoring process and how sort of established facilities weigh in, being an established center weighs into that?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Included in the board item, we talk about the different scoring levels, right? And so there's not qualified, which means that an application as submitted demonstrates that they can't meet all of the statutory requirements. And so they're not qualified. And then we have less qualified, qualified, and highly qualified. To get into the highly qualified rank, which is receiving 7 to 10 points on any given narrative question, you can get into that range if you can show that you have the ability to begin providing services within the first 30 days. And so we had 15 existing TRCs that reapplied for funding this cycle. And the ones that scored well were able to demonstrate, yes, we can continue providing services, whether it be outreach, mental health services, having a multidisciplinary team within those 30 days. So they do have the ability to score higher if they communicate that with us. I will say as well, there is a question on the for the applicants to answer around their ability to serve the largest geographic region, and that's another area where perhaps a TRC or an organization that's not currently a TRC might be able to demonstrate a need, right? And so I hope that's helpful in answering your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, the follow-up, the thing that surprises me a little bit is just that I would assume that an existing facility would score sort of largely speaking at the highest level of readiness to provide fund or to provide services in all of those categories, or to meet the qualifications in all those categories. Is that not always the case from your experience, or?
It's not always the case. We do have some TRCs, existing TRCs, that received lower scores. I think the lowest from an existing TRC was in the 40s. And so, we did everything within our due diligence to be able to communicate the requirements and what they needed, both in the NOFA, at the board's recommendation last year. This year, we held a webinar where we walked through the NOFA. We went through the process of allowing folks to ask questions, and then we answered them all publicly on our website. And so we have done, I think, what we can to try to set organizations up for success to receive higher scores. But yes, there are organizations that do not communicate that ability, and it's an objective scoring process. And so we need that clear communication of you have the ability to start within 30 days.
Both today and in the past, one of the consistent themes we've heard is how destabilizing it is and how inefficient it is to have the disruptions to funding that we've seen. Would we need a statutory amendment to move to a longer funding cycle?
I believe you would, and there's also some administrative challenges as well. So the statute currently allows for a 3-year funding cycle. One of the reasons that CalVCB runs on a 2-year funding cycle is actually the limited funding itself. And so we get the appropriations each year from the restitution fund, the Safe Neighborhood and Schools Fund, and then in recent years, the general fund. But I will note that that's expiring starting this year. And so from our lens, the money actually goes further on a 2-year funding cycle because we can grant it to fewer organizations, if that makes sense. When you move to a longer funding cycle, the grant process would actually, we believe, become more competitive, and they would receive smaller awards and have to make that money last longer. And so that's been the consideration that we've had internally.
Chair, if I may, I would also note that the awards might be somewhat speculative at that point, given that we don't know what projections for the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Fund would be in outlying years. Therefore, it would require likely amendments to each of those contracts every year when that funding does come through.
Thank you. That's a good point. I mean, we see this even today. These are in the staff recommendation. It's just a projected award. We don't actually know yet because we don't have the figures. So trying to scale that out for even longer periods could be challenging. Yes. Without a more stable funding source, that is. Yes, Member Johnson.
Yeah, I guess that's a great question, and I sort of as a follow up, I'm thinking about. So fair disclosure, I also sit on the CIDLAC, TCAC, our affordable housing funding bodies, and they were faced with a similar situation where the request for funding would go up and up and up, and the availability of funding was not going up in commensurate fashion, and they had to reevaluate. It had to create a competitive scoring process. And one of the things they did was set up sort of a pool for new developers. That was a known pool. There'd be a spot for new developers to come in, but also recognizing that existing developers be able to compete amongst themselves for funds in the larger pool. And so I'm thinking about stability for existing TRCs, while also I just encourage us to think about creative ways in the go forward fashion, looking ahead, to find a way to support obviously the development of TRCs in underserved areas, while also making sure that we have continuity, which seems to be, as we heard last year and we've heard this year today, it seems to be of paramount importance. And certainly when I think about the people that you all are serving, the TRCs are serving with these dollars, that continuity is critical. So anyway, just thinking about, I encourage us to think creatively about how to manage that balance.
Yeah, I think as we've committed, we're happy to continue to have those conversations. I would just note, with the diminished fund that we have, and we expect to get smaller, you're going to reach a point where you're not going to be able to fund all of the existing TRCs, much less create new ones. And so I think, again, it's going to be a decision that will have to be made at some point if the additional funds are not procured from some other source.
Were you still speaking? I wasn't sure if you had more questions.
Oh, I have another question, but it's on a separate issue. So you should go ahead.
Oh,
Rebecca.
you should go ahead. I'll come after you.
Oh. Sure. Well, one other question, and I'm obviously curious to staff's perspective on this, but also if there are TRCs that want to weigh in that process. Is there? Last year, there was a concern about the amount that each TRC. There were TRCs that were receiving grants that they felt ultimately might not keep them afloat, right? So there's a minimum amount that would work to support a TRC if you can't find additional funding. And I guess I'm curious. Does a small amount of funding for a TRC, a smaller amount of funding versus no funding, allow them a possibility or the likelihood of getting more funding elsewhere? Meaning that, if the sort of acknowledgement from the TRC or from the Cal VCB grant program, even if it's a small amount, say couple $100,000 or $100,000, does that give a credibility to a TRC that that then they are in a better position to go out and seek other funding elsewhere, or no? I'm just trying to understand the process a little bit.
Yeah, I think our concern is that they have to meet the statutory requirements even when they are funded, right? And so the statutory requirements require a multidisciplinary team of a psychiatrist, a psychologist, and a social worker. And then in addition to, those positions, which are quite costly, you also have basic operating costs, right? So their rent, insurance, and then that's just the bare minimum. Most of the proposals that come through, they want outreach workers to help them bring in staff. They want additional social workers and additional support. And so when we were considering alternatives, really went back and forth on that concept. And ultimately, when we started to look at the budgets that folks submitted, we became concerned about viability if you fund into Tier 4, because giving folks that limited amount of money for a 2-year grant cycle, we think we're setting them up to not be able to meet those statutory requirements.
Understood.
I see Ms. Wade has her hand up.
So I can answer that question experientially. Our funding, the last grant cycle, was cut 64%. We made it work. And last year, 60% of our income was from the TRC model. And we made up that difference. But yes, having that stamp of approval from the state that we are an official state-endorsed trauma recovery center. That is one reason why we're still floating, even though our funds from you ran out before the 2-year grant. We were not given enough last year. We were identified by the Orange County Trial Lawyers Association as an important part of their work, and their fundraiser in November, all proceeds went to A Quarter Blue. That's what's sustaining us right now. And the reason we were chosen was because we were an official trauma recovery center through the state of California. And like I said earlier, while we applied for 100% of our funds to come from the TRC, that was, shooting for the stars. If you shoot for the ground before you, you're going to get a portion of that. But we shot for the stars. We said what our budget was, which is basically 1.2. And our people are so dedicated to the cause, they are willing to take pay cuts while we ask for them to receive an increase in pay to be in line with what is normal, or actually less than normal in this field. We know our people would take less just to stay giving these services to victims. So a percentage and the endorsement from the state is incredibly important. I think it's important to consider that all trauma recovery centers be in that realm of fundraising to get people invested in the process of stepping alongside of victims of crime. So yes, is the answer to your question.
Thank you, Ms. Wade. Mr. Frazier?
Yes, I want to just validate what Ms. Wade just mentioned, because BOSS was woefully underfunded the first round, and we made it work as well. We made it work with other funding sources. We created the multidisciplinary team, and we made it work. And so, again, I mean, we bid for a higher amount this round, but certainly if we were awarded a lower amount, we'd make that work, just as we did the last round. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frazier. And Member Becton, you had a question.
Yeah, just a couple of questions, and I wanted to kind of clarify what kind of time frame we're on in terms of making the awards, because I think some of the suggestions that we heard in the meeting today are worth considering, but I don't know if we have time constraints. That's one question I have.
So I would say that a lot of the considerations for how we structure the awards overall are decisions that we'll have to contemplate for next funding cycle. We really don't, because these grants start July 1, we really don't have the time to, also because the NOFA, it already happened, right? We've gone through this process and we're at the end of it. So any of the considerations about how we want to restructure the program would really have to be for next year.
Okay, that's what I wanted to clarify. And so I guess we heard a lot of really good comments, and some of them just pretty heart-wrenching stories. I think the one that, if I could lift it up, that really resonated was the process of the stop and start. I know we talked about this the last time. It's just hard to really digest the idea of having existing TRCs that don't get funded and then or get a small amount of funding, and then starting up new TRCs, and then maybe those TRCs in a year or two are not funded again. And so really the disruption to those organizations, I think I would love to see us, not necessarily for this cycle, but perhaps thinking ahead. There was a suggestion made that we consider being receptive to having some of the voices that are in the room today at a table that could maybe reimagine and think about some other methods that might also be helpful to administering this funding. And I do want to recognize all of the effort that staff has put into this process in terms of trying to be fair and balanced with the funding. It is really disheartening to see all the cuts in funding that we're facing. We are going through similar things in my office, and there's another day for maybe the person who asked the question about DA offices and victim services. Almost every DA office, by the way, has a team of victim advocates. So I can't speak to your question as to Santa Clara's program, but I certainly would be willing to talk to you about how involved DA offices are with victim services. And so I would encourage us going forward, not necessarily for this cycle, given the time constraints, to consider some of the recommendations that were made today. And one of them would be to invite some of these partners into the room to just really a think session about what possibilities might work better and result in a process that is not as heart-wrenching for our TRC partners. And then the only other thing I don't know, again, the process that was used for notifying those TRCs that didn't get funding or who had significant cuts. We had quite a few people come into the room to say that they really don't know what happened. And I think that's another area that it would be great to hear how people are notified about their shortcomings. Is there any sort of a discussion or maybe a table or something that shows them, you didn't score well here, but this is something that you could do in the future. So is there a process for informing those TRCs that are not getting funding or that got significant cuts, what they could do to improve? That's it for me.
So after this board meeting and we understand the board's position, we do reach out to organizations and let them know if they were recommended for funding or not recommended for funding. And if they're recommended for funding, what the preliminary amount is, making it very clear that that amount might change with the May revise. We do have conversations with folks after those emails who were not recommended for funding about the scores that they received and why they received those scores. So we're open to those conversations and walking folks through that.
Thank you. Yes.
Sure. One additional thought, and it sounds like we're going to be facing limited funds next year. We've all agreed on that. In addition, it sounds like there's a bit of one-time funding in here in this year's, because it's $5 million that we found elsewhere, basically, or not found elsewhere, but that we're not going to have next year in the process. And so that, in some ways it puts me, I get worried thinking about funding a new TRC now, that we know we are unlikely to be able to fund at full 2 years from now, because we're going to have not only a diminished funds sort of by Prop 36 implementation, but also by not having that $5 million that sort of we found elsewhere from previous funding rounds. I have no recommendation here. I just expressing a little concern about that. That we're sort of setting TRCs up to ramp up and then again to not have funding available to them.
Yeah, I think I would just say that we always encourage the TRCs, as we've heard many of them do, to seek other sources of funding, to understand that government funding is variable. The general fund money that we've used over the last 3 years was established in one fiscal year when the state had enough funds to cover that. And that was what lawmakers chose to do with it. And that money is now running out, and the state is in a more precarious fiscal condition. So it is always important that anyone who receives this grant, and we've said to all of them, that they should be looking for other sources of funding and not relying solely on the state. So I hear what you're saying, but it is, of course, a catch-22, right? Because you want to serve regions that we're not serving right now, which sometimes requires new TRCs, and that there are TRCs who have established through the scoring process that they are well equipped to serve trauma victims, and we have to adhere to that process and to the scoring to be fair and to follow statute.
I see Ms. Wiggall has her hand up.
Thank you. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak again. I just also wanted to share that I think kind of what the issue that Member Johnson is also raising around what it means to fund 2 new programs right now in the midst of the current funding environment that exists could be, you know, a setup for continuing the cycle of opening and closing in TRCs that I think we're all hearing a lot of comment about, right? How that impacts these communities when they disappear. And despite having a tight timeline to work with, it seems really worth considering whether or not this is also the moment perhaps to kind of change that point in this cycle. Because I think we're hearing from current TRCs also about their willingness to even try to work with funds that are, you know, less than the minimum recommended budget, but if they're part of larger organizations that also have the resources to kind of compensate for that and allows them to have fidelity to this comprehensive model, you know, that's one way that I think has been approached in the past. I'm just aware that while the TRCs are, I think, all recognize the need to address sustainability of funding and to look for additional sources, this is a very challenging time to be doing that moving forward. And we know there are less resources available potentially for the next several years for TRCs. So just on that basis too, would ask the board to respectfully maybe consider whether this is the time to move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Wiggall. So I think we've heard a lot of really compelling testimony today, and the notion that we might get together again, both as a board and with the community to hear from them and to collaborate and brainstorm about how we can make this process easier and work better for everyone going forward, understanding the serious limitations on funding that we have now and we're likely to continue to have for some time. You know, I would encourage us to pursue that for this coming, before the coming NOFA, basically, and also in time for us to, if we do need to seek legislation, to allow us to do that as well. So there's a motion on the table. Are we prepared to vote on it today, or is there a desire to send it back to staff for additional work?
Member Becton, as the party who moved the motion, do you support the motion for a vote, or would you like to withdraw or amend?
I think I would at least like to amend the motion to include an opportunity for discussion for future allocations about some of the issues that were raised today, so that we have a discussion. I'm noticing in the chat there's still a number of people who are saying that they really still didn't get adequate information about, you know, what would have improved their chances for getting funding. So things like that we make sure that we have a specific process for the notification, but also for maybe one-on-ones with those organizations so that everyone has a clear idea of what their shortcomings might have been. And then also a process for rethinking the way the allocations are made as to whether or not, especially as we continue to have a shortage of funding, we should be funding new TRCs and then setting them up just to be defunded in the future when the funds get tighter and tighter. So basically, I would be asking to amend to have a conversation about the next cycle of funding, to talk about our processes and our scoring, and also other methods for distribution of the funds.
So the motion on the table is to approve the proposed staff awards, subject to a later conversation about improving the process to take place with the board, staff, and stakeholders. Is there a second?
I will second, and I do want to add in this process that, I feel a little beholden, that the scoring rubric is established and you need fidelity to that process. You set up a process and you follow it, and I'm a firm believer in that. And so I find myself disinclined to send this back for reevaluation. Staff did their job, they've evaluated the wiggle room here really was, how you make the award in the end, how much, and how do you spread that out in a way that makes sure that everyone is funded enough to meet this minimum statutory requirements. It's my assumption in this process that we shouldn't be awarding somebody without knowing that we're giving enough to at least meet the minimum requirements. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because otherwise we'd be out of order in maybe funding an organization that we didn't know could meet the minimum standards, or hadn't demonstrated that. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me, and the fidelity to the process is really important, right? Like I said, set out rules, you follow them. That being said, I think we have a lot of work to do in the go forward fashion, as Member Becton was mentioning as well, to think about how we make the process fair and clear, and we don't have a sort of a start and stop of funding. And I also, I want to make sure that happens soon. I know it won't be that long before we have a no vote. And again, this is a single year cycle, a grant award process with a 2-year grant awards with them. So I'm hopeful that anybody that doesn't receive funding today in this process will be able to come back next year with that revised process and a little more clarity on how to do it. So I'll second, but I want to make that comment in the process, that I think there's work to be done.
Thank you, Member Johnson. Council, please call the roll.
The motion for consideration is approval of the Trauma Recovery Center grant awards as recommended, and the authority for staff to increase or decrease the awards as necessary to reflect the funds available following release of the governor's revised budget in May, as well as direction to staff to look at processes and engage stakeholders for future TRC grants. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
I'd like to suggest that we take a 5-minute break. We've been here for a while, and we have a few items left to discuss in the public session. So we'll be back in 5 minutes. Okay, we are reconvening now back into the remainder of our public session. Let's, Console, please call the roll since we're coming back.
Member Becton,
Present.
Member Johnson,
Here.
Chair Ravel.
Present.
Thank you. Item 7 is the request for authority to conclude the rulemaking process following modifications for amendments to the California Code of Regulations, Title II, Section 640, et sec, which will be presented by Senior Attorney Laura Simpson.
Here we go. Good afternoon, board members. My name is Laura Simpson, and I am a senior attorney here at CalVCB. For the second time, I am asking for the board to authorize staff to conclude the rulemaking process to amend the regulations governing claims by erroneously convicted persons under Penal Code Section 4900. Early last year, staff determined that changes to the regulations and the claim form were needed as a result of two events. And the first was legislative changes to the procedural and the substantive basis for resolving 4,900 claims as implemented by SB 78 in January of 2024. And the second event was there was an exponential increase in the number of claims that were received, but only a slight increase in the number of claims that were approved. So the proposed amendments to the regulations in Section 640 and 645, as well as the revised claim form, included both substantive and stylistic changes in order to comply with current law and also to clarify the process for obtaining relief, especially for claimants that are representing themselves. When we were crafting these proposed regulations back in June of 2024, CalVCB reached out to various stakeholders, including the Attorney General and the Innocence Project, and we incorporated the feedback that we received, which was only from the Attorney General. In July of 2024, the board authorized staff to commence the rulemaking process. And to that end, staff submitted the initial rulemaking package to the Office of Administrative Law, which I'm going to refer to as OAL for shorthand. But we gave the initial rulemaking package to OAL, which was published on August 9th of 2024. And that started a 45-day public comment period. That period ended on September 23rd, and there were no comments received, and there was no request for a hearing. So then in November of 2024, the board authorized staff to conclude the rulemaking process. Staff submitted the final rulemaking package to OAL in December. But then in January of 2025, after several informal discussions with OAL, it was determined that one substantive modification and 3 non-substantive modifications were necessary. And just to briefly summarize each of those 4 modifications. So the first and sole substantive modification applies to Section 642.1D, and that concerns withdrawal of a claim. The modification adds a sentence that clarifies when a claimant's response must be received by the hearing officer before the underlying claim may be deemed withdrawn. The second and non-substantive modification applies to Section 640, Subdivision E3, and that concerns the type of content within the Attorney General's response that may be considered by the board without imposing any obligation upon the Attorney General to provide that content. So this modification, it clarifies that the board may only consider evidence and argument of injury for a claim that falls under the mandated approval provisions, whereas the board may additionally consider evidence and argument of guilt and innocence for all the other claims. And the third and non-substantive modification applies to Section 642, Subdivisions A3 and A4, and it only inserts the phrase pursuant to before the statutory citations that serve as examples of deficient claims. And then the fourth and the final modification, it is also non-substantive. It applies to Section 645A that concerns the hearing officer's proposed decisions for 4,900 claims. This modification inserts a cross-reference to Section 619.3, which is a regulation that generally applies to proposed decisions for all types of claims that are processed by CalVCB. That section in turn references 619.1, and that enumerates the required content and permissible considerations for all proposed decisions and decisions by the board. So in order to pursue all 4 of these proposed modifications, staff withdrew the final rulemaking package from OAL on January 22nd, and then we resumed the rulemaking process. Specifically on February 5th, CalVCB posted notice of all 4 modifications on the website. And because these modifications were all sufficiently related to the original proposed regulations, only a 15-day public comment period was needed. So that period concluded on February 20th, and once again, there were no comments received and no request for a hearing. So as a result, staff requests that the board adopt the proposed regulations as recently modified and also adopt the revised claim form. The staff further requests the board's authorization to conclude the rulemaking process. And in your materials to support this request, you'll see that there is a final text of the proposed regulation that includes these modifications, and it has today's date at the top. You'll also see there's a final statement of reasons following modification, an updated informative digest policy statement following modification, and the erroneously convicted person claim form as revised in July of 2024. For the board's convenience, we have added yellow highlight to these materials to easily identify changed text from the previous November board documents. But those highlights will be removed before we submit them to OAL to comply with OAL's formatting processes or formatting requirements. With the board's approval, then staff will submit these documents to OAL as part of the final rulemaking package, and OAL will then resume its review of our submission, and if approved, then these proposed regulations will become effective on July 1st of 2025. I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Council. Is there any discussion or questions on these regulations from the board? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve item 7?
I'll move to approve.
And a second? I'll second.
I second.
Is there any public comment on this item here in Sacramento or via Zoom?
Seeing none, Council, please call the roll.
The pending motion is authorization for the executive officer to conclude the rulemaking process following modification for the amendments to the California Code of Regulations and to execute and submit any required documents to the Office of Administrative Law. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 8 is the Penal Code Section 4900 claim of Richard Almeida, which will be presented by Chief Counsel Kim Gutierrez.
On November 7th of 2023, Richard Almeida filed an application with the California Victim Compensation Board as an erroneously convicted person. That application was based on his 2018 conviction for assault with a deadly weapon causing great bodily injury, which was reversed on appeal without a finding of factual innocence. The claim seeks $187 and $40 for 1,336 days imprisonment. The Attorney General objected to the claim, arguing the evidence fails to prove Mr. Almeida's innocence by a preponderance. As explained in detail in the proposed decision, the claim is recommended for denial as Almeida has failed to meet his burden of showing by a preponderance of evidence that he is innocent of the challenged convictions as required by Penal Code Section 4900, Subdivision A. Throughout these proceedings, Mr. Almeida has been represented by Attorney Chris Clausen, and the Office of the Attorney General is represented by Deputy Attorney General Catherine Althizer.
Thank you, Council. We'll hear first from Mr. Clausen.
Hello, everyone. We believe the proposed order wrongfully mirrors the trial court's erroneous felony conviction of Mr. Almeida. For the record, Mr. Almeida's constitutional rights were violated, as evidenced by the appellate court's opinion, his constitutional right to due process, his constitutional right to a fair trial. The district attorney in the underlying trial court was reported to the California Bar Association for misconduct. And we believe this proposed order to be accepted by the California Victim Compensation Board essentially mirrors the flawed and erroneous conviction that he suffered already. And part and parcel of the Attorney General's argument and the proposed order claims that Almeida's defense of another defense is in equipoise at the time of this critical incident, meaning that, you know, somehow this is a 50-50 type of deal. If you look at the underlying facts, it is littered with Doug Albright claiming that he was checking a baseball bat upon Mr. Almeida and his friend Stice Weatherwax. He says he checked the bat at him, who knows how many times in the record. And the trial court was snake charmed. And I implore the California Victim Compensation Board to not be snake charmed as well. When someone runs up on someone and checks a baseball bat, it is a half swing of a baseball bat. If anyone outside went and ran up on someone and half swung a baseball bat, the person would be charged with aggravated assault. And so during this critical event, Mr. Almeida and his friend Stice Weatherwax were check swinged off this property, who knows how many times. And then this critical issue of being supposedly in equipoise, we argued that two officers testified that Albright told them that he was smashing Weatherwax with a baseball bat, and then he was stabbed. The Attorney General argues that after check swinging him this entire time, Albright then takes the end of the baseball bat with each hand, slams it into the chest of Weatherwax, and then he gets stabbed. And this discrepancy is somehow equipoise. Either methodology, Doug Albright instituted the use of this deadly weapon into the fray. And if you look at page 13 of the underlying petition, Doug Albright testified he was never threatened by Almeida. Doug Albright testified that he was not afraid of Almeida. And Doug Albright testified he never saw anything in Almeida's hands. And so essentially, the California Victim Compensation Board is, I feel, somehow being snake charmed like the trial court into believing that, what should have Almeida done? Just sat there and watched his friend get beaten to death? As if he would never regain a right to defense of another. To me, it's just completely nonsensical. Mr. Almeida was not charged with burglary. Mr. Almeida was not charged with trespassing. And so much of the proposed order deals with issues that occurred after this critical event. There's no perfect playbook as to how someone's supposed to behave after a critical event like this. And so we would ask the California Victim Compensation Board to focus its microscope upon what occurred at the time of the stabbing, not everything that occurred afterward for this young man who was scarred from going to prison for nearly 4 years. And with that, my co-counsel, Attorney Brian Varela, is also present. And if it's okay with the Compensation Board, I'll pass the I'll pass the mic to Mr. Varela.
Please, Mr. Varela.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here, board members. I'm going to address the proposed order, the proposed decision that was drafted and delivered by, I believe, counsel. I believe that was Ms. Simpton, as we did not provide a written reply. This proposal was replete with misleading statements and factually incorrect statements, misstatements of law. For example, page 19, the new evidence is brought up comparing ours and the paucity, commenting on the paucity of our new evidence with the abundance of new evidence that was presented by the DA. We don't have access to what the DA has. We don't have access to officer further statements, officer interviews, videos. to insinuate that we didn't do our homework the way the DA did, or we weren't persuasive enough because our new evidence wasn't as robust, is insulting at best. Page 22 of the proposed decision has a misstatement of law that is so egregious that it rises to the level of the misstatements of law that got this case sent to the appellate court, sent back down to the DA by the appellate court, and eventually dismissed. Ms. Simpson writes that the only way an aggressor can use self-defense as a legitimate defense is if the initial aggressor communicates to the other party that he wishes to discontinue the confrontation. Other party hears him and he actually discontinues the conversation. This is totally incorrect. This is totally incorrect in that it's the only way. Another way is if the other party intensifies the fight. I get into a fist fight. I'm the initial aggressor. Other party pulls a knife. I'm perfectly within my right to pull a knife in self-defense. This misstatement of law shows how disconnected the drafter is with this case. Half check, half swings. The drafter even commends Mr. Douglas Albright with showing restraint by only half swinging a baseball bat, regulation size, a grown man, as my co-counsel pointed out. This is the equivalent of me taking a .357 and only pulling the trigger halfway. Person on the other end is most definitely going to be justified in his or her reasonable belief of imminent great bodily harm or death. I ask the board, look at it through that lens. Look at it as if you are the other end of a bat that's coming half a swing at you. You don't know if it's going to stop. Somebody swinging a knife halfway. You don't know if it's going to stop. Certainly, any normal person would be entitled to self-defense, or somebody observing that normal person under that threat would certainly be entitled to defense of another in that similar situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Varela. We'll hear next from Ms. Altizer from the Attorney General's office.
Good afternoon. I'm Deputy Attorney General Catherine Altizer. The Attorney General requests that the board adopt the proposed decision, and we have no further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Altizer. Is there any discussion on this item by the board? Do I have a motion on item 8?
I move to approve the hearing officer's recommendation.
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item here in Sacramento or via Zoom?
Seeing none, council, please call the roll.
Motion before the board is adoption of the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Richard Almeida. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Moving to item 9 is the Penal Code Section 4900 claim of Kelvin Fuller, which will be presented by Chief Counsel Kim Gutierrez.
Kelvin Fuller filed an application as erroneously convicted person with the California Victim Compensation Board on January 27th of 2025. That application is based on his 1985 convictions for rape, oral copulation by force, robbery, and kidnap for robbery with enhancements for personal use of a knife, and rape and oral copulation in concert. Those convictions were vacated and dismissed in 2024. Also in September 2024, the court found Mr. Fuller factually innocent of these crimes within the meaning of Penal Code Section 1485.55. As mandated by the court order and pursuant to Penal Code Section 1485.55, the proposed decision recommends compensation in the amount of $1,727,320, which represents $140 per day for each of the 12,338 days Mr. Fuller was wrongfully imprisoned. Throughout these proceedings, Mr. Fuller has been represented by Joseph Trujillo of Loyola's Project for the Innocent, and the Office of the Attorney General is represented by Deputy Attorney General Jessica Leal.
Thank you, Counsel. We'll hear first from Mr. Trujillo.
Good afternoon. We want to express our gratitude for today. And just what I like to say is it's a powerful reminder for all of us the impact that new evidence can have in uncovering the truth that jurors sometimes don't hear, even if there hasn't been necessarily misconduct. And the critical evidence in today's case, Mr. Fuller's case, was discovered in collaboration with the Los Angeles County Conviction Integrity Unit. And so we want to express our gratitude for their diligence and work in uncovering this new evidence. We're deeply grateful that the truth has been brought to light with this new evidence. The jury should have heard 40 years ago. No compensation can make up for the years that Mr. Fuller has lost, but this recognition is a step towards his rebuilding. So we want to express our gratitude. And I do believe Mr. Fuller is here today and would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Counsel. Mr. Fuller, please.
Yes, I thank the board and I thank my lawyers and the Conviction Integrity Unit. And I know time can never be restored or bought, but this can be a gateway to a new life and a new beginning. I appreciate you guys and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fuller, for being here. We'll hear now from Ms. Leal from the Attorney General's office.
Good afternoon. The Attorney General was only involved in the calculation of compensation in this case. So with that, I just ask that the board adopt the proposed decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leal. Is there any discussion on this item by the board? Do I have a motion on item 9?
I move to approve the hearing officer's recommendation.
Second.
Is there any public comment on this item here in Sacramento or via Zoom?
Seeing none, Counsel, please call the roll.
The motion before the board is adoption of the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Kelvin Fuller. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 10 is the Penal Code Section 4900 claim of Glenn Payne, which will be presented by Chief Counsel Kim Gutierrez.
On September 23rd of 2024, Glenn Payne filed an application with Cal VCB as an erroneously convicted person. That application was supplemented on October 2nd of 2024. The application is based on Mr. Payne's 1990 convictions for lewd and lascivious conduct upon a child under 14, with enhancements for kidnapping for the purpose of committing sexual assault and infliction of great bodily injury. Those convictions were vacated and dismissed in January 2018, following a motion to vacate the conviction based upon newly discovered evidence of actual innocence pursuant to Penal Code Section 1473.7. As there was no objection filed by the Office of the Attorney General for this claim, compensation is automatic under Penal Code Section 4900, subsection B. Accordingly, the proposed decision recommends compensation in the amount of $765,380, which represents $140 for each of the 5,467 days Mr. Payne was wrongfully imprisoned. Mr. Payne is represented in this matter by Linda Starr and Catherine Boyle of the Northern California Innocence Project. Throughout these proceedings, the Office of the Attorney General was represented by Deputy Attorney General Caitlin Dupree, and today appearing on behalf of the Attorney General is Jessica Leal.
Thank you, Counsel. We'll hear first from Ms. Boyle.
Yes, thank you so much, and good afternoon. My name is Catherine Boyle, and I'm a
volunteer attorney with the Northern California Innocence Project, and proud to have worked on Mr. Payne's exoneration and this compensation claim. Mr. Payne is here with me, and I'm going to refer to him as Glenn throughout because after 7 years of working together, I think it's fair to say we've become close. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. And it is truly remarkable that we are here. And not just because it has been more than 34 years since Glenn's wrongful conviction, for which he served just shy of 15 years. The fact that we are here before the Victims' Compensation Board today is a testament to the determination and collective effort on the part of many people over the years to seek justice for Glenn, including Glenn himself, and to the system's ability to evolve in order to be more just. Glenn was convicted in 1990 based almost exclusively on now repudiated microscopic hair comparison expert testimony, which provided the link between the alleged incident, the child, and Glenn. The only other evidence against Glenn were the hearsay statements of a 2-year-old child obtained through leading, suggestive, unrecorded questioning that would not have been allowed under current standards. Glenn was the only Black man in the neighborhood, and the investigating officer admitted that the child only said she was hurt by a Black man in response to the officer's leading questions. At trial, the child testified on direct and identified Glenn several times, but because the child was incapable of being cross-examined, the judge struck the child's testimony but denied a mistrial. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. After 2 full days of deliberations and the readback of the testimony of 7 witnesses, the jury indicated it was deadlocked. The court ordered further deliberations, and it was only then that the jury found Glenn guilty. The court sentenced Glenn to a prison term of 27 years. Glenn always maintained his innocence and contacted us in 2002, right after we first opened, seeking post-conviction DNA testing. NCIP conducted a thorough search, but the physical evidence had been destroyed, and we were unable to locate the trial transcripts. We unfortunately had to close his case. Glenn served his time and was released in April of 2005. Once Glenn was out of custody, he had no legal standing to challenge his conviction and was required to register as a sex offender. This could have been the end of the road, but several things happened which allowed us to return to Glenn's case. First, in 2015, the FBI and DOJ repudiated the type of statistical testimony given by the criminalist in Glenn's case, and later concluded that at least 90% of all cases in which the FBI used microscopic hair analysis contained erroneous expert testimony. In response, the FBI sent letters to all state governors to ensure state criminalists were testifying within the limits of science and, if not, to take appropriate corrective action. Later that year, NCIP-sponsored legislation went into effect, which enabled innocent people to challenge their conviction when scientific evidence had been repudiated by the original expert at trial or undermined by later scientific advances. In 2017, NCIP-supported legislation went into effect, which permitted convicted people no longer in custody, like Glenn, to challenge their convictions in certain circumstances. With these changes in the law, we then had the tools to challenge Glenn's conviction, and on January 26, 2018, Glenn was finally exonerated. But even then, we couldn't seek compensation for Glenn because of the 2-year statute of limitations on filing compensation claims. In 2020, NCIP-sponsored legislation took effect, which extended the statute of limitations to 10 years. This is just a very abbreviated summary of all the work that went into Glenn's case over the years. It really was a Herculean effort that involved the work of an impressively large and diverse group of people. We are grateful to everyone that helped over the course of all these years. First of all, we want to thank the law firm of Morrison and Forster and also the Innocence Center, who partnered with us to find cases in which the now discredited microscopic hair comparison testimony was a relevant factor and through which we identified Glenn's closed case. We'd also like to thank Santa Clara County Assistant District Attorney David Angel, who conceded that our motion to vacate should be granted, and also to Santa Clara County criminalist Mark Moriyama, who repudiated his trial testimony in a declaration. We'd like to thank everyone over the years at the Northern California Innocence Project who believed in Glenn and worked to secure justice on his behalf. Linda Starr, Todd Freeze, Simone Stewart, Aaron Awis-Rao, Cynthia Murphy, former External Relations Director Lori Stone, former NCIP clinical law students Jonathan Stevenson, Ariel Hostetler, and Carrie Craven, and former Stevens Fellow Michelle Takeff. We are also incredibly grateful to the law firm of Berliner Cohen, partner Dave Spence, and associate Jeanette Martinez, who is a former NCIP student, for creating Glenn's Special Needs Trust. And we are very grateful to the team at the Attorney General's office for recognizing the meritorious nature of Glenn's claim, and especially to Kim Gaultier, hope I'm pronouncing that right, for looking into whether the payment could be made into Glenn's trust and providing guidance for us on this apparent issue of first impression. Finally, I especially want to thank the Compensation Board for their consideration of Glenn's case and their hopefully just decision today. Know that you are changing a life with your decision today. But mostly, I want to thank and compliment Glenn. Glenn never stopped fighting for justice and to get the acknowledgement that the system made a devastating mistake. Despite the most challenging circumstances, having suffered 15 years of wrongful incarceration, time on parole, homelessness, and substance abuse, while also dealing with other issues, he has remained patient and never lost his big, sweet smile, while always hoping for accountability. The compensation from the California VCB cannot undo the almost 15 years that Glenn spent sitting in prison and the harm that those years caused him. But it can and will provide him with the stability he has lacked for so long and help him make the most of the years to come. Glenn, congratulations. You deserve this and so much more. And thank you everyone for your time. And I think we should all feel a little celebratory today for the role that each of us has played in providing hope and justice for Glenn. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boyle. Mr. Payne, would you like to address the board?
No, yes, I'm very thankful that I succeeded in winning the case. It took me a while, but I wasn't going to never let go of my freedom or what had happened. I don't have much to say, but thank you. Sir. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. I think Ben Starr and family.
Thank you, Mr. Payne. We'll hear now from Ms. Leal from the Attorney General's office.
Good afternoon again. As we stated in our response, the Attorney General does not have an objection to compensation in this claim. And unless the board has any questions, we would like to submit on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Leal. Is there discussion on this item by the board? Do I have a motion on item 10?
I move to adopt the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code 4900 matter of Glenn Payne.
And I second.
Is there any public comment on this item here in Sacramento or via Zoom? Seeing none.
Council, please call the roll.
The motion before the board is adoption of the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Glenn Payne. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 11 is the Penal Code Section 4900 claim of Zachary Vanderhorse, which will be presented by Chief Counsel Kim Gauthier.
Zachary Vanderhorse filed an application as an erroneously convicted person with the California Victim Compensation Board on August 15th of 2023. That application was supplemented on September 29th of 2023. It is based on his 1974 convictions for robbery and rape and other related charges. In December 2021, pursuant to a stipulated petition for a finding of factual innocence, Mr. Vanderhorse was found factually innocent of the robbery and rape. His claim seeks compensation ranging from $460,180 to $1,225,840 for his erroneous convictions, arguing he would have been released on parole but for these erroneous convictions. The Attorney General objected to the claim on the issue of injury only, contending that Mr. Vanderhorse is not entitled to any compensation in light of the concurrent life sentence he was serving for murder. As detailed in the proposed decision, it is recommended that Mr. Vanderhorst receive compensation in the amount of $280, which represents $140 per day for each of the 2 days of imprisonment solely attributable to his erroneous convictions. Throughout these proceedings, Mr. Vanderhorst has been represented by the law firm of Van Nest and Peters, and Kari Tillery is here today to address the board. The Office of the Attorney General has been represented by Deputy Attorney General Sharon Loeffner.
Thank you, Counsel. Mr. Tillery, please.
Good afternoon, board members. My name. Okay, is that better? Good afternoon, board members. My name is Kari Tillery. I'm with the law firm of Kecker, Van Est, and Peters. I represent Zachary Vanderhorst. Zachary will be 70 years old in a few months. He was 19 when he went into prison, and he didn't see daylight again until he was 65 years old. Zachary will be the first one to tell you that he made some bad choices when he was a kid, and the proposed decision highlights every single one of Zachary's mistakes dating back to when he was an 11-year-old kid growing up in the Fillmore housing projects. But Zachary Vanderhorst is also a victim who was repeatedly wronged by the state. He's the victim of a disinterested public defender who failed to do any investigation into his case and told him he had to plead guilty or that he would be executed, despite the fact that the death penalty was never on the table. He was then browbeat by his co-defendant's counsel into pleading guilty while his co-defendant struck a better deal. And then he spent 46 years in prison as a sex offender and all that goes along with that. He also had to register as a sex offender after he was released from prison. We're here today because Zachary Vanderhorst was found factually innocent of a robbery and brutal rape of a stranger with a firearm, a horrific crime for which he was sentenced to 24 years in prison. There's no dispute that Zachary Vanderhorst is entitled to compensation for this wrongful conviction. The question before this board is not whether he is entitled to compensation, but how much. This is a somewhat difficult question because Zachary Vanderhorst was also serving a sentence for felony murder, a conviction that was also vacated. But just because the harm is difficult to measure does not mean it didn't happen. It did. The proposed decision argues that regardless of the wrongful rape conviction, Zachary likely would have served all but 2 of his 46-year sentence in prison. In other words, the proposed decision posits that a brutal stranger rape that Zachary pled guilty to under extreme duress, but for which he consistently asserted his innocence to the parole board, had essentially no bearing on the monstrous period of time he served in prison. That's not right. It's not correct. The preponderance of the evidence, that is 50% in a feather, shows that it's more likely than not that Zachary would have been released but for his wrongful conviction and the 24-year sentence for robbery and rape he didn't commit. First, over the course of dozens of parole hearings, the board found that Zachary failed to show the necessary insight into his crimes to warrant release. But how could he show insight into a crime he didn't commit? And of course, his denial of the crime affected the parole board's repeated denials. It's common sense, and it's reflected in the transcripts. Any of us sitting on that board would be wary of paroling someone we believe to be an unrepentant, violent rapist. There's no question that that conviction on his jacket affected the amount of time he served in prison. The proposed decision argues that the parole board was not permitted to deny parole based solely on an inmate's denial of a crime. And it cites some statutes. For example, Code of Regulation, Title 15, Section 2234. But that's not what that section says. It says the board shall not require an admission of guilt to any crime for which the prisoner was committed. A prisoner may refuse to discuss the facts of the crime, in which instance a decision shall be made based on other information available, and the refusal shall not be held against the petitioner. That does not mean that in a case where they believe someone is guilty of a crime, they can, and that person is not showing insight, that they can certainly hold that against the inmate, and they did in this case. Second, based on CDCR's own data, the average lifer spends 23 years in prison. The hearing officer's proposed decision argues that the board should ignore this data because there is no evidence that Zachary was an average lifer. But we're not talking about a sentence on the margins. We're not talking about a 25-year sentence or a 30-year sentence. We're talking about a 46-year term in prison, twice as long as the average lifer. And that extended sentence is due in large part to the fact that Mr. Vanderhorse was wrongfully convicted of a brutal rape. Third, we presented the testimony of Charles Carbone, an undisputed expert in California parole law, who provided insight into the parole process and the reasons parole was denied, including in this case. The hearing officer's proposed decision largely substitutes her own judgment for the interpretation of her own interpretation of the parole hearing transcript for those of Mr. Carbone. The proposed decision argues that this board should largely disregard Mr. Carbone's testimony, which stands for the uncontroversial proposition that a violent stranger rape had an impact on Zachary Vanderhorse's sentence. The board should not ignore Mr. Carbone's testimony, but rather treat it as another data point establishing that it was more likely than not that Mr. Vanderhorse spent more time in prison because of his wrongful conviction than he would have if that conviction did not exist. The proposed decision also places great emphasis on Zachary's record in prison and highlights several serious violations over the course of 46 years in prison. But there were also long stretches during which he was violation-free, including from 1992 to 2009. Typically, the parole board looks favorably on a petitioner who has been discipline-free for 5 years. That didn't matter in Zachary's case. Ultimately, we are not asking this board to disregard the felony murder sentence, but merely place it in context, affix it to reality, both factually and legally. Zachary does not need to prove with absolute certainty what the parole board would have done without the wrongful stranger rape conviction on his jacket. Only that a preponderance of the evidence, 50% and a feather, shows that it is more likely than not that Zachary would have been released earlier, but for the wrongful conviction. And when considering the factual record, this board does not have to do what the hearing officer recommends, which is to interpret every fact in a light most negative to Mr. Vanderhorse. There's no law or regulation that requires that. Indeed, to the contrary, the 4900 statute has been broadened and expanded to allow for more compensation, not less. There's also something perverse about relying on his now vacated felony murder conviction that we as a society, the voters of this state, collectively agreed was unjust and unfair and needed to be fixed. After a contested hearing before a Superior Court judge, which found that he was not culpable for that murder, vacated that conviction. He's not entitled to compensation for that time, but to use that time as a cudgel to prevent him from getting compensation for the 24 years he was sentenced for a rape that he did not commit is just wrong. Ultimately, it does not require speculation, a great leap of faith, or any special mental gymnastics to determine that a wrongful conviction for a violent rape of a stranger with a gun caused Zachary Vanderhorse to spend more time in prison than he would have if that conviction didn't exist. And this board is required to compensate Zachary for that time, even if the exact amount cannot be determined with the precision we normally see in a case like this. Zachary was a victim of a system and deserves to be compensated. We've offered a number of different ways to calculate that compensation, all of which directly reflect a measure of the harm Zachary suffered. The most conservative estimate compensates him for 9 of the 46 years he spent in prison. This would mean that he served 37 years. Again, 14 years longer than the average lifer without any compensation for his now vacated felony murder conviction. This would be a fair and just outcome, and this board is empowered to do just that. Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tillery. I don't know if Mr. Vanderhorst is present. Is your client present?
He may be on Zoom.
Okay.
I'm not sure. He was provided the link.
Okay.
But he's also, I just note, he's also blind and disabled, and you know, so it may be difficult for him to join us.
Okay. Well, Mr. Vanderhorst, if you're present, would you like to address the board? We'll give it a minute or so. We can hear from Ms. Luffner, and then if Mr. Vanderhorst is in attendance, he can address the board after Ms. Luffner from the Attorney General's office. Ms. Luffner?
Good afternoon. We would simply request that the board please adopt the proposed decision, and we do not have any further comments at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Luffner. Is there any discussion on this item by the board? I think it's the claim depends on a number of inferences that are not necessarily supported by a preponderance, in my view. I think it's very speculative that Mr. Vanderhorst might have been released any sooner than he was, given not just the conviction for the Ellis crime that was later vacated, but the felony murder conviction, as well as the Terra Vista crimes, which Mr. Vanderhorst continued to deny his culpability for, but for which he was never exonerated. Those convictions remain valid. And the felony murder was, the law changed retroactively, but at the time, that was a considered first-degree murder. So in my mind, I think it's very difficult to say within anywhere near preponderance of the evidence that Mr. Vanderhorst would have been released any sooner on parole. Do I have a motion on item 11?
I move that we adopt the hearing officer's proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Zachary Vanderhorst.
And I'll second that, recognizing obviously the complexity of this recommendation and the decision, but I do second that motion.
Is there any public comment on this item here in Sacramento or via Zoom?
Council, please call the roll.
The motion before the board is adoption of the hearing officer proposed decision in the Penal Code Section 4900 matter of Zachary Vanderhorse. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
The board will now convene into closed session under Government Code Section 11126 sub C3 to discuss numbers 1 through 46 of the Victim Compensation Program. The board is reconvening into open session under Government Code Section 11126 sub C3. Do I have a motion for numbers 1 through 46 of the Victim Compensation Program?
I move to approve.
I second.
Council, please call the roll.
The motion before the board is approval of numbers 1 through 46 of the Victim Compensation Program. Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Is there any other business that needs to come before the board this afternoon? Seeing and hearing none, do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move adjournment.
I second.
Council, please call the roll.
Member Becton.
Aye.
Member Johnson.
Aye.
Chair Ravel.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you, everyone. The next meeting is scheduled to occur on May 15th, 2025.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.